This is part 9 of the Craftsman Emerson Gen 4 Rebuild series. If you haven't seen part 8, click the link at the top of the screen. In this video, we'll begin assembly. Hello everyone, I'm Jeff and welcome to my shop. We got a lot to cover, so let's get to it. First, we're going to be attaching some panels to the head unit, and to do that, we're going to need some of these drive screws. They are a size 4 and they are 1/4 inch long. These are zinc plated, but any drive screws will work fine. I get these from McMaster Car. They come in like a box of 100 for like 10 bucks. So we'll just lay the side panel there and then set the drive screws in the holes. And if your panels have been warped or anything like that, you may have to kind of play with this to get them to line up properly, but should be fairly self-explanatory. So then I just use a brass punch and a brass tip hammer and drive those drive screws into the head casting, like so. So for the model number panel, pretty much the same thing. It goes on the back. So again, we'll need the same drive screws, so the same size for all 3 of these panels. And we'll just get one started and then drive it in with the brass punch and do the same with the other side. And lastly, we've got the side panel for the right side of the head. Same thing as the other side. So once we've got it attached, we can set the head aside. Next, we're going to install the panel on the hub. And to do this, we're using this 3M double-sided stick tape. It's mounting tape. So I'm just going to clean the back of the panel, and we'll go ahead and put the tape on the back side of the belt cover panel at the same time. I'm just cleaning them up with isopropyl alcohol or rubbing alcohol. And we're just going to lay that tape on there and just align it with one of the edges. And we'll cut another piece. And then place it on there. The aluminum on this panel is really thin, so there's 2 ways that you can do this. You can use an X-Acto knife, which is kind of a pain in the butt in my opinion because the tape keeps wanting to stick to the knife blade. Or use scissors, and if you're going to use scissors, just be careful because you can cut into that aluminum panel real easy. The other panels are thicker than this one, but this one's really thin. And we're just cutting it out around the panel. And then we'll use an X-Acto knife to peel off the back side of the cover on that double-sided tape. That's always the hardest part for me. I probably should have just grabbed some tweezers. It would have been a heck of a lot easier, but yeah, we eventually get it. And now we can place the panel on the hub. So there's no right or wrong way to do this. It just goes in the center of the hub. Like so. We can set that hub aside. Next, we'll go ahead and apply the tape to the back side of the belt cover panel. Again, just line up one of the edges. Sorry, my pumpkin's in the way. And then we need another piece. And we're basically going to do the exact same thing. We're just going to cut it out around the panel with the scissors. And like I said, this panel is thicker, so the chances of you cutting into it with the scissors is a lot less. So once you've applied these panels with this 3M double-sided mounting tape, if you ever have to remove them again, you're probably going to end up warping the panels to get them off, because this stuff is some serious tape. For the hub, you could probably use a heat gun and then start removing the panel. But on the belt cover, with it being made out of plastic, you would not want to use a heat gun on it. Maybe use WD-40. I don't know. Haven't tried that. But either way, they're pretty much permanent once you mount them with this stuff. All right, so next we're going to be assembling the spindle pulley assembly, and for that you need 2 of these 6205 ball bearings. These are ZZEs, which means that they have the E clearance, and they are metal shielded on both sides. And they were lubricated with Polyrex, and they're made in India. But these are Nachi bearings, which is a Japanese company, and it's very good quality bearings. And you would not have to have all of those requirements. You just need the 6205 ball bearings, and you need 2 of them. These are the same size ball bearings that are in the 100 and the 150 for the spindle pulley assembly. All of your 15.5-inch drill presses use the same bearings for the spindle pulley assembly, except for the commercial models. So we will take the spindle shaft, and notice there is a flat on there, and then there is a groove that the lock ring sits in. And we'll just start one of the bearings down at the lock ring end. Sometimes these will just slide on, but if they don't, then you're going to be using a rubber tipped mallet or the hammer like I'm using. And next I'm just using the spacer that's going to sit between those two bearings, and it rides on the inner race, so using it to drive that bearing down was no big deal. So then we're going to get that second bearing started. And once we get it seated as far as it's going to go, then I've got a piece of PVC pipe that will ride on the inner race as well. And we're just going to smack that bearing down a little bit further. We need to get it below that cutout, that groove for the locking ring, the retaining ring. If we go further down, it's not a big deal because we're going to be pushing these bearings towards the locking ring once we get the locking ring on there, or the retaining ring, the inner retaining ring. So these retaining rings actually have a direction they're supposed to be applied. One side is sharper than the other. That's what I was feeling for there. And you want the sharper end facing away from the bearings, but if you put it on backwards, no big deal. So once we've got that locking ring in there, then we can push those bearings back down towards the locking ring. You want them resting right against that locking ring. Once that's done, make sure the bearings are still spinning freely. And then we're going to install the spindle pulley. So we're just lining up that flat with the hole that the set screw goes in. So you have two of these set screws with this drill press. They're the same size. One of them has a little bit of nylon on the thread. That nylon's kind of worn off at this point, but it's the one that goes here. The other one is for the motor pulley. So I'm just using a little bit of Loctite. And we will just insert and tighten it down. And so those bearings should be, that bearing closest to the pulley, the inner race of that bearing should be resting on the pulley. And then just make sure they spin freely. And we are good to hook. Next, we're going to assemble the belt cover. So these are the clips that we had to bend to get them off originally. So we're just putting them back on this bracket and bending them back in place. And we'll be attaching them to the belt cover with a screw and a washer. I think the diagram calls for 2 washers, but they weren't present when I disassembled this thing, and I really don't think that second washer makes a heck of a difference, so no big deal. Flat tip. And the same for the other bracket or clip. As you can see above me there, I've got one of the pages from the parts diagram on the table, and I'm doing that for each one of these sub-assemblies. It makes it easier to figure out what screws go to what. A lot of the screws that are on the parts diagrams, they give you their specifications, their size, and their length. So that helps out a lot. But once we've got that bracket installed, then we will install the second bracket. Sometime today. Boy. Okay. And it's inside the cover. It needs to be on the outside of the cover, like that. Okay. So the second bracket, make sure you've got it oriented properly. And these are the clips for it. There are 4 screws. And these screws are tapered on the heads so that they sit inside the plastic flush. So that our panel, when we apply it, will sit on there flat. So once we've got all 4 of those in, then we can go ahead and install the panel. So again, we just remove that cover off of the double-sided tape. And then we can just drop the panel in there. There we go. So we can just set the belt cover aside and move on to the Spindle Quill assembly. So I'm going to grab the Quill locking ring and the quill itself, go over to the vise, and go ahead and use some vice grips, hook them onto this locking ring. Like so. Then we'll just expand the ring and drop it into its groove. And then remove the vice grips. Make sure it's in there. Back over to the table. So you're going to need 2 of these ball bearings. They're 6202 with a 5/8 special bore. These are the same ball bearings that are used in all of your 15.5-inch Craftsman drill presses, 100s, 150s, all that. They all have a 5/8 bore. So if you just get 6202s, that's not a standard bore. The standard bore is like 17.5 millimeters, and your bearings will not fit. So make sure you get 5/8 bore. So we'll drop the quill washer on there. And then the quill bumper or quill gasket. And I got those ball bearings from Accurate Bearing Company, if you're wondering. So we'll start the first bearing on the spindle. And if it gets hung up, then I use just another one of these pieces of PVC pipe that I've got. And that'll ride on the inner race of the ball bearing. Whatever you end up using, make sure it's riding on the inner race or the outer race of the ball bearing, not the center of the ball bearing, because you will deform the ball bearing then. So those are the old snap rings or retaining rings, and these are some replacements that I'm going to use because we had to bend one of those really bad to get all this disassembled. And this slides down and mounts directly above the ball bearing. There's a groove for it there. And that keeps the ball bearing in place. I'll just use that PVC pipe to make sure that that snap ring is fully seated down there. Make sure it's in that groove, because if it's not, then the entire spindle can actually push back through the ball bearing and drop down further than it's supposed to. So next we'll go ahead and insert the spindle inside the quill. Note that the lock ring and washer and all that is down at the business end where the taper is. And then we'll seat that bearing inside the quill. So sometimes it'll just drop in there. This is fitting really tight, which is good. The tighter the better, to be honest with you. It cuts down on the amount of run out. So I'm going to grab some boards here. Rest the quill on the boards, and these boards are tall enough that the spindle will be able to drop between the boards. And we'll just seat. Now notice that I'm using the rubber or plastic end of my mallet there on that taper. We don't want to damage the taper. So once we've got that bearing fully seated, then we can go ahead and apply the second bearing. And that one kind of just dropped down in there, but we'll go ahead and seat it with that piece of PVC pipe. And there are two rings or two grooves down there for snap rings. I don't know what the second one's for, but the one closest to the bearing is where we want this snap ring to go. Luckily, reinstalling this is way easier than getting it out of there. So once we get it past that first snap ring, then we can just use a piece of PVC or whatever to press it into the slot down there it's supposed to be in. And we can just check it with that screwdriver, make sure it is definitely in that slot, and then make sure everything spins freely. We're good to go there. So the last thing we're going to do in this video is go ahead and install the screw, the lock washer, and the nut for the feed stop and the feed stop collar. And then we'll slap it on the quill. We're not worried about its orientation right now. We'll figure all that out when we're ready to install that. But that'll wrap up this video. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please like and subscribe. We'll continue with assembly in the next video. I appreciate all the support, and as always, I will see you next time.